People are constantly asking which diets work best, and as someone who's been a nutrition and fitness coach for over 10 years, I know where people breaks, I know the main considerations that lead to diet success. So today we're going to go through a range of popular diets, rank them. Here we go. Paleo, S tier. So paleo, the idea of just eating, natural foods, things that involve nature, minimal processed foods, etc., is great because it just gets people overall to have less of the very, very high dense calorie foods that are ultra convenient and tasty. The ways we can combine a muffin, have the fats and sugars to combine, that's fantastic. Something you don't see as much in the nature heavy foods. Some of the issues with this one is it can be hard to adhere to over time, just with social events, etc. And a lot of people, when they have the paleo, non-paleo framework, when they break, they break. You often see there are situations where they can just push things to extremes. So, mass doing, butter or avocados to high heaven. And just if they are someone who can eat ungodly amounts, they're not really restricted by calories in any different way. So that for some people can just lead to being out of hand. And often I think it's just honestly the sustainability of it. Number 2, keto. Now this one is C tier. Again, there's health benefits and there might even be, some interesting research on certain inflammatory markers as it relates to certain diseases. I'm not going to get too out of step here on a YouTube channel making outrageous claims, but some interesting ones potentially even with cancer. Early days, who knows? It's good. Again, people can consume massive amounts of carbohydrates, and when people reduce their carbohydrates a little bit over time, it can lead to less overall cravings on that, but there is still the phase of getting into ketosis, and undoubtedly the biggest, most aggressively largest red flag is the adherability of it. There's arguments that if someone is in true ketosis, they can break out of it and get back into it rather quickly if they were going to have some carbs, but I have seen people just constantly, butter up and coconut oil up to high heaven. The calories pretty high, even with this framework. Again, fat calories can accumulate really quickly, even though not taking up much stomach space. Sorry. But also you do see when they do break, they're not just breaking on white rice or even table sugar, just basic carbohydrates. They go really hard into pizzas, burgers, brownies, etc. And you do see some kind of versions of binge cycles often. Again, if you're adhering to this, great. Same even applies to paleo, but this is a common consideration why it's just going to enter as C tier. B is fasting. So range of different fasting approaches, the idea of having periods of your day we eat, periods we don't, 16 hours fasting, 8 hours eating is a common one. People do 20 and 4. I'm going to rank it B tier. Idea behind that is if you are someone who wants to feel full and satiated and you're not inherently a snacker or anxious and use food in that kind of domain, it can be nice to backload and have a heavier amount of calories in the times you actually want it, need it, and feel full from it. And the other times when you could be nibbling, you just avoid, distract yourself, etc. It can go quite well. There are counter arguments how it goes with cortisol or muscle building and a range of different things. It can be okay for muscle building, don't get me wrong. But the biggest thing I tend to see is it can really activate the starve binge cycle within people. So the idea of after a while, it can be funny things. Let's say you're doing 18 hours fasting, 6 hours of eating. In the last couple hours of fasting, if you had just eaten something in that context, let's say it's 300 calories, it might stop your brain entering the situation of, oh my God, I'm going to demolish everything and go really hard. Because in that really going hard phase, you're going to consume an extra 1,000 calories that you otherwise wouldn't have if you broke the fast a little bit earlier and had 300 calories. I see this constantly. So it can kind of exacerbate an on-off, bingey, non-bingey kind of cycle with people, but applied within the context of moving food towards the calories for when you can actually enjoy them and eat them, I do like that element of it overall. So we're going to call it B tier, not too bad. Next up, Mediterranean diet. So this one we're going to call C tier. So this involves eating foods that you see in the Mediterranean areas, a lot of fresh fruits, vegetables, oils, meats, and there's studies. This became popular because of some research that people in the Mediterranean areas can live longer. There are a few issues with those studies where they don't really confound way of life, stress, family communities, all kinds of things involved other than just diet. So it's hard to actually pinpoint, well, what is actually the diet itself versus other things. Again, on average, very clean foods. You do see vegetables and fruits involved, which is cool. Some healthy oils, fantastic. Again, it just struggles when you enter social environments. It doesn't really just solve it when you are a nighttime binger. It doesn't really get ahead of someone who's trying to get a bit more protein off, and it can be a bit of a harder thing. Not that it necessarily has to do with Mediterranean diet, but the baseline might be a touch lower on average. So overall, we're going to call this a B or C tier. We'll call it C tier to be rough. Next up is Weight Watchers. So this one I'm going to call a B tier. So the cool thing I'd say about a Weight Watchers, you can set whatever version of these meal prep companies that give you a bunch of food. We'll call it B tier because I like the element of it just removes the decision making for you. You know what your meals are, you know what your snacks are. So it is handy for people with decision fatigue and people who just get overwhelmed at these kind of things and are constantly just in the cupboard, oh, can I have this or that? Or debating, you know, whether to get that muffin along with their coffee in the takeaway place. But this one just gives you exact, so it's cool for that. Negatives, I'd say potentially is the volume of food can be just extremely low. So if you are someone with any kind of appetite, it is arguably one of the rougher ways to consume 1200, etc. calories. There are ways where you could be way more satiated, less hungry, and working around not using willpower and motivation as much as you might be if you are choosing these low sizable foods that you get in Weight Watchers. Often the snacks can be iffy, that could be biased more towards main meals, arguably. Overall can be B tier, it can work. The calorie numbers they give, or they used to do point system, I think they're doing a hybrid now, are not the most perfectly calculated things. I think they're probably doing some version of just assuming you'll have some breaking things here and there. But it can be good for getting people started, but it does run into certain issues over time. So we're gonna call it a B tier. Next up is carnivore. So carnivore, we're gonna call C tier. Again, some of these things can be A tier if it works for you perfectly based on desires and preferences and foods, but overall we're gonna call it a C tier. So idea, carnivore, meat varieties. You can get your micronutrients if you're really mindful of organ meats and all kinds of different foods. But overall, it's very easy to be a little bit deficient there. It can be great if you enjoy meat, of course. It's one way to just bias that. It does struggle with the binary of just how many calories are you gonna have. Just because it can vary massively. You know, someone could have like 2 kilos of chicken breast a day and have a very different outcome to having, 2 kilos of pork belly a day. And these are all fine things within the carnivore diet on average, but they have wildly different outcomes. I'd say it just, again, runs into, well, it's simple and I like that. So if you're going out and about for dinner, like, what am I going to get? I'm going to get a steak. And it can be fantastic in that sense. It probably depends how minute you are. There's probably some good arguments for why you'd want some more fiber in your diet, even though not necessarily essential, and the carnivore people will tell you that, and often correctly. But in terms of what actually helps people stay full and satiated, protein does keep you feeling full and satiated, but it's not the most powerful variable, I find. And when it deals with things such as how much of your stomach content is actually full at given times, it can lead some things to be desired. Plus, I will argue that training performance on average is better when you've got some carbohydrates within the diet. Definitely a fast twitch, more explosive stuff. I've never seen someone come from a keto or carnivore diet to carbohydrate style eating over time and not have better performance in the gym. Never. Next up is the 5-2 diet. There's different variations of this, but this is the idea if you eat really clean throughout the weekdays and you have the weekends off. Honestly, just bro bodybuilding style diets was probably something more like a 6-1, where you'd have like 6 clean days and 1 cheat day. This is gonna go D or maybe F tier. I think it starts off at D tier when people do this stuff, but often actually devolves to being F tier. So reason being, it again creates like this binary of good food, bad food, which when bad food enters the mix now in these contexts, allow for the blowouts that would be so much larger than they would have if they just weren't dieting in the first place. Can people, while being in deficit all week for 5 days, generate this much caloric deficit? Yes. Can it be completely outpaced with that much caloric surplus on the weekend? Absolutely. And it almost does this thing where you diet just enough days to get rid of some of the gut bacteria issues, the cravings, and all that stuff towards the Thursday, Friday within your week. But then once you're starting to get the momentum, you are binging out, going crazy. Although someone doing a 5-2 diet or a variation of it wouldn't say, hey, go ahead and binge. They often actually word it in a little bit as a little bit of a sell, but it, in practicality terms, always leads to this breaking cycle and the mental headaches that come from that, and how hard it is to get back on board Monday is not a way to live. So overall, early on, it can go okay, because it can just mean you've went from 7 days having iffy food to only 2 days having iffy food, and the blowback on the days 6 or 7 isn't that bad. But over time, it absolutely becomes F tier, because when you've been in deficit for a while, the weekends you can definitely outpace all the gains you made in the weekdays. Next up is flexible dieting. So this one we will call A tier. Some people B tier. So flexible dieting, the idea of just tracking foods if it fits your macro style, and you can include whatever / nothing / whatever you like, as long as it fits within the framework of your given either macros or calories or both. So it's really cool for just showing people the variety they can have and entering the framework of, wow, I can have Nutella and still lose weight. I can still have these foods that I thought were bad foods, and it can help break people out of that mold. It can be a bit of a thing where some people with the decision fatigue element can struggle, because it's just another variable, something they've got to think about. Giving them more options is often a net negative. You do see some variations of people just only focus on the macros and the micronutrients start to suffer over time. You do see variations of people still suffering with the ability to actually control what they're going to do 7 days a week, because some people, when you introduce certain foods, and let's say they've got some kind of semi-addictive nature to sugar, for example, entering a little bit on paper is great, and like their flexible dieting crew would say, hey, a little bit of this stuff is fine, and that's true. But for some people it's a trigger, and sometimes actually the binary in that regard can actually work better if you know certain foods are heroin for you. So if you know you can have a couple bites of, or a couple of blocks of chocolate and leave it there, fantastic. Some people, and I can kind of relate to this, a few bites of ice cream, like a good chocolate ice cream for me, is more of a tease than it is enjoyable, and can easily set the psychological framework to effort. Even if you know, okay, I can fit in 85 grams of, ice cream and still fit my calories, the net satiation of that, it's almost not worth opening Pandora's box. So for people that have struggled with food addiction over time, this can be something where it can actually lead to more net negative, while still having the benefits of showing people how they can integrate certain foods and away from the black and white, good, bad framework. So pretty good overall, we'll call it an A tier, but there are a few really key considerations for why it can still derail people, and doesn't actually tell people about the whens and hows to help navigate their days, which is pretty big. Stress eating, nighttime eating, which we'll get to. Next up is a meal plan approach. So this is almost can enter the exact opposite pros and cons of flexible dieting, where it is great for people who have too much decision fatigue. It's great if the meal plan actually bolsters in foods and all those different variations around the times they need it, when they need it for either training performance, let's say there's food around training windows, or extra food volume for when they're most filling, which isn't a specific requirement of flexible dieting. It can be good there, but it can still enter a scenario of like, what do I do in social events? What do I do when there are different foods in front of me? This unique meal my nan made that she never makes that I get to enjoy. There is still that element there to have the balance for. Next up is a hybrid approach of flexible dieting and meal planning. So this is the idea of you have like a baseline meal plan and then a flexible dieting approach you can sub into if life gets crazy. So, or there's just different unexpected things popping up. This we're gonna call an A+ tier. It's pretty good. It's pretty close to S tier. So I think this does a really good balance in just playing the cards of the different dieting days for the days that actually present themselves. So you've got the right tools for the toolbox for when you actually need them. And then S tier, number one is customized. Sorry to be boring, but people will have unique things that lead to their lack of results. What to actually do when you're stress eating. Do you know what someone's exact hydration levels are? Do you know when they need to be most full? Do you know when they need to have a meal at 10 p.m. at night because they stop at 7, then when we're thinking about food the whole time? Do you know like how to navigate that person's particularly diet strategy with night shifts? There's just all those variables to really get in the weeds of people. And if you work with someone over time, this is what I do. This is why like kind of Brian coaching is S tier, is you can just map around the struggles, the pain points, where people break with specific strategies that block off when given too much freedom, or even assuming you'll have all the information yourself to know how to plug those gaps. Doesn't necessarily always come in these diets when you give them more autonomy. So it's a nice combination when working with someone to get the information you need to block off the areas that will destroy your results while emphasizing things that increase your chances of success. Anyway, there's a tier video. Hopefully that was handy. Comment if you want more tier videos in the future, but thank you for watching.